Good morning, good morning, good morning. Can we all quiet down for just a moment? This Crown Forum is sponsored by Morehouse Adoti, and we want to take a moment to tell you what we are about. My name is Larry Aldridge III. I am a junior psychology major from Americas, Georgia here at Morehouse College, and I am on the Adoti e-board for this academic school year.
My name is Sean Brim, sophomore biology major from PG County, Maryland. I am the treasurer of Adoti.
My name is Chase Stokes. I'm a sophomore CTIMS major from Houston, Texas, and I serve as creative director for Adoti.
So what Adoti is, we are the LGBTQIA plus organization on campus. We are here for all students that are a part of the community and those who are not, quite frankly. We make it our mission and our purpose in all of our events and our policies that we try to put out to be very inclusive and very empowering for all students, especially those of the community. We have several events that we do throughout the school year. We've had a karaoke night. We had a launch party when we rebranded from Safe Space to Adoti. We did AUC Thanksgiving in partnership with several different companies. We've had panels about being queer Christians and other things. So we have various events. We would love to see you all there. And so Chase will give you a little bit more about why we rebranded to Adoti and what Adoti specifically means.
And before Chase does that, I just want to say it's located in the Kilgore basement. A lot of people don't know where that is. Before you get to Chick-fil-A, you make a left, and then you walk into, if you're walking into Kilgore Suites, you make that left into the door in the hallway, and it's all the way at the back.
So what Adoti means is same gender loving men in Swahili. Originally we were Safe Space, but we wanted to rebrand as Adoti to make it more inclusive to all people within the community, as well as our hetero brothers on Morehouse College campus. We wanted to get rid of stigmas that were in place from Safe Space and start fresh within Morehouse College.
And so at this time, we'll have Reverend Reinhardt come forward and explain to you, well, not explain to you all, because I would hope you all have already done some research on Bain Arresting, but to explain the importance of Bain Arresting and why this Crown Forum is a part of the series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Let's try this again. Good morning. Thank you so very much. I am Quincy James Reinhardt, Associate Campus Minister here at Morehouse, and also a PhD student. My research is on Bayard Rustin, Black gay men's bodies, and the 1960s civil rights movement. So what I am going to do very briefly is introduce to you who Bayard Rustin was. When people hear the name Bayard Taylor Rustin, many are unfamiliar with who this man was or the great accomplishments he made. Those who may be familiar with Rustin automatically link him to homosexuality as an identifier. Although Rustin was gay, he certainly offered more than his sexuality to the cause of social justice. Rustin, might I say, was a complex person, as most people are. He was born March 17, 1912, in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and was raised by his grandparents, Julia and Janeford Rustin. Bayard, in many ways, was a triple threat. He was a communist, gay, and Quaker. Much of his Quaker upbringing was passed down to him from his grandmother Julia, who was also Quaker. The Quaker tradition significantly informs the pacifism Rustin used to help King fundamentally shape the work of the civil rights movement into the mode of nonviolent resistance. The marginality Rustin faced or experienced in the movement was Black church-led was not due to the fact that he was Quaker, but that he was a committed communist and he was gay. Rustin grew up during the McCarthy era, which opposed anyone who was communist and anyone who was gay. To be communist and gay was antithetical to the cultural norms of mainstream society. While much of American history has erased Rustin's name from its historical memory, more recently, theologians and philosophers and historians have been writing to resurrect his story to make him again visible. Rustin was initially exiled from the civil rights movement because he was a gay man. As such, Rustin's homosexuality and communist participation exiled him over time from the memory of the people within the civil rights movement. For Rustin, his black gay body became a site of terror the day he renounced his affiliation with the civil rights movement in consequence of the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., then U.S. Congressman and then pastor of Abyssinia Baptist Church in Harlem, New York, threatening Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with false accusations alleging that King and Rustin were sleeping together. Powell's demeanor was that if King did not remove Rustin from his duties within the movement, he would promote the rumor that the two were engaged in a homosexual relationship. Rustin's black gay body was not only a site of trauma, but also became a site of terror in that Rustin's identity became a threat to the political and social establishment. Rustin became, for example, a mode of what happens when black gay bodies are antithetical to the social, cultural, and ecclesiastical structures they are attempting to navigate. As a black gay man, Rustin experienced the marginality personally, yet orchestrated one of the most powerful movements in American history, the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Although the march featured Dr. King prominently as the leader of the civil rights movement, it provided for Rustin a platform which to use as a tool for transformation. His lived experience and reflection functions as a framework to further how to understand and empathize with oppressed and alienated persons. Bayard Rustin's black gay bodies and others are continually used as sites of terror throughout the world. And so Bayard Rustin, in many regards, is a model, not only for Morehouse students, but for persons across the world in terms of championing justice for all persons. This is a brief little tidbit of who Bayard Rustin really was. Now I turn the further program over to Adoti. Thank you.
At this time, we would like to welcome Nikita Pope to the stage, a graduating sociology major and the first trans graduate of Morehouse College. Can you please give her a round of applause as she comes forward?
Good morning. Y'all can speak louder than that. Good morning. So, excuse me for 1 second. I want to first thank Adoti for this opportunity. I know they could have selected anyone to speak, but they chose me, so I'm very humbled by their invitation. Secondly, I want to pay honor to Spirit, because Spirit is who empowers me when I feel weak. He gives me courage when I'm afraid. And I also want to give honor to the vast army and strong legacy of strength behind me this morning, and I'm talking about my ancestors because I know that they are here with me in this space. And lastly, I want to call out some of the names of my trans sisters and siblings and non-binary siblings who have attended Morehouse in the past. I want to call the names of London Day Ritchie Lou, Chanel Hudson, Fatima Jamal King, Ramon Johnson, and Taylor Jordan. I honor you all. So my name is Nikita Anastasia Pope, and I'm a 29-year-old transsexual woman, and this morning I am here to share my story. So the way I want to kick off our time together might seem a bit odd to some of you because we're not in church. And no, I'm not a Christian. Actually, I study and practice New Orleans Vodun. But the scriptures that I'm going to be citing this morning actually serve a purpose for where I want to go. So if you all can put the first slide up there for me. So the first scripture I want to reference is Matthew 13:34. It says that Jesus spoke to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. The second scripture I want to use is Matthew 13:13 on the second slide. And it says, "Therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." So essentially, Jesus spoke in parables, and a parable, for those of you who do not know, is essentially a story. And so Jesus spoke in parables for two main reasons, because number one, his parables were earthly stories that had heavenly meanings. And the second reason was because most people who were in the crowd, much like some of you today, were not really invested in hearing the truth. And so although his disciples understood what he was saying, unbelievers did not. So I just want to go ahead and make this announcement, who I'm here for this morning and who I'm not here for. I'm not here for the people who do not believe that trans lives don't matter. I'm not here for the ones who believe that black trans women should be ignored or overlooked. I'm not here for you this morning. I'm here for the ones who believe that trans lives and trans stories need to be centered. I'm here for the ones who have been marginalized, the ones who have been erased, the ones who have been silenced. That's who I'm here for this morning. Because the reality is there's many of you in this room who will walk out those doors not comprehending what you have seen, not comprehending what you have heard in this space. So I'm not here for you. I'm here for the ones who have eyes to see and ears to hear. The beloved poetess Maya Angelou once said, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And I cannot speak for any of you, but I can speak for myself, and I can say that I understand that agony. I understand what it's like to be overlooked and nobody to really know your story, but to judge you based upon what they think about you. And so I'm going to take these next few moments and just take the liberty to be a caged bird who sings. And some of you all will get that reference. So I was born in Charleston, West Virginia, and I started the very first few years of my life in a place called the Bottom. So when Drake talks about started from the bottom, now we're here, I can actually relate to that. Me and my mother, she raised me by herself for several years. We started off in a very small government housing community in a city called Dunbar, West Virginia, and it was called the Bottom, and it's still there today. And Christianity was always a very strong part of my background, and we actually lived a few feet behind my home church. So every Sunday, we would just walk a few feet to church, and we would be there. So fast forward, in 1996, my mother got married to the head musician at our church. And a few years later, in 1999, my stepfather got an invitation to move to Columbus, Ohio, where he had a job offer. And so our family relocated to Columbus, Ohio in 1999. And when I got to Columbus, Ohio, it was a bit of a culture shock for me because I came from West Virginia. And I don't know how many of you know about West Virginia. It's very white and very small. And so when I got to Columbus, I was around more black people than I ever had been in my life. And my mother, like I said, I had a very strong Christian upbringing, so they immediately enrolled me in a mega church. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with, he's a famous preacher by the name of Rob Parsley. And so he has a church called World Harvest Church in Columbus, Ohio, and I went to his school. And so anyway, that was a whole separate experience that I don't have time to go into. But several years down the road, in late 2005, my mother began to get very sick. And at first she thought it was bronchitis. She wasn't sure what was wrong. And so she went to the doctor, and a few months later, in the beginning of 2006, the doctors diagnosed her with stage 4 lung cancer. And we don't know how she got it. She never smoked, nothing like that. So we're not really sure what happened. But anyway, she was 37 years old when the doctors diagnosed her. And they said, "Angela, you have 3 months to live." And so, of course, she was very shaken. But my mother was always a woman of faith. And so my mother did what women of faith do. They pray, they fast, they believe, and that's what she did. And so she outlived the doctor's prognosis by a year. Yeah. She outlived the prognosis by a year. And so January 14, 2007, I was at church. I was very involved in my home church in Columbus, Ohio. And I used to sing in the choir. And so, you know, black churches, they love to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 church services on any given Sunday. And so we were at a second service that Sunday. And we were singing and stuff like that. So my godbrother, who was in the choir with us, he got a phone call from my stepdad. He said, "You need to get her child home now." And so they didn't tell me what was wrong, but I knew something wasn't right. And so we got to the house, and I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but when we walked in the house, you could feel the death on the place. And so I walked up to my mom's room, and she was non-responsive. That morning she had been talking, and so when I got in the house and got up to her room, she couldn't talk. She was literally gasping for air. And she was gasping for air. And I never had the chance to say goodbye. I never had the chance to say to my mother, "I love you," one more time. Never got that chance. And so a few minutes after I got in the house, she was hooked up to an oxygen machine. And I was 16 years old at the time. And they unplugged the oxygen machine, and she died within seconds. And so we had been in Columbus for about 10 years at this time. And so, you know, within 3 weeks' time, I got ripped away from everything that I knew. I got ripped away from my home, my church, my school, my friends, my family, everything within 3 weeks. It was all gone. And I was forced to move back to West Virginia with my father and my stepdad. My father and my stepmom. And it was very hard. You know, I don't have the time to go into the emotions of all that. It was very difficult and very devastating. And so when I got back home, I'm going to fast forward again here. I graduated from high school in 2009. And so when I graduated, I wanted to go to Bible college. And my mother, she was actually a preacher. On top of being an amazing singer, she was a preacher, and I wanted to follow in her footsteps. And so I went to Bible college at the age of 19. And I went to a Bible college in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so after Bible college, I actually began traveling the world as a preacher, and I did prophetic and healing ministry. So everywhere that I went, I preached and prophesied. I went to Tanzania, Kenya, Northern Ireland, England, Canada, and so this is what I did for about 5 years. I traveled the world. And around 2015, I couldn't take it anymore. Because what was happening was I would go to these churches and I would preach about, you know, God's going to give you the victory, God's going to bring you out, and then I would be coming home suicidal and ready to end my life. And it didn't make any sense because I was conflicted on the inside about who I really was. And so, anyway, in the summer of 2015, I made a very drastic decision, and I decided to quit ministry cold turkey. I walked away. I never looked back. And several months later, in February of 2016, I came out on Facebook very publicly as a gay man. At least that's what I thought I was. And so I came out, and, you know, but the gender piece, as far as the transition, that came later. So we'll get to that in a moment. But in March of 2016, and this is where we get to Morehouse, I was attending West Virginia State University at the time. And for those who do not know, West Virginia State is actually the alma mater of T.D. Jakes. It's also where the famous mathematician Katherine Johnson attended school. And so that's where I was before I came here. And I was a political science major. And so I was sitting in the library, and all of a sudden something hit me and said, apply to Morehouse. And it made no sense because I was already only 2 years away from graduating. And so I said, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. And I applied to Morehouse, passed the deadline, and still got in. And so when I got here, everything was pretty normal for the first semester. But after the first semester, and I was here officially, in the spring of 2017. So after that first semester, something in me just turned over that particular summer. And so in the summer of 2017, I decided it was time for me to transition to female. And quite honestly, I had always known that that's who I was, but it always scared me, so I avoided it. And so by the fall of 2017, when school started here again, I started my transition. And it was a very bold move, you know, because if nobody else pats me on the back, I pat myself on the back for doing a transition like that at this school, because let me tell y'all something, y'all are a tough crowd. So to do my transition here took a lot of guts that a lot of you all would never be able to comprehend. And so when I started my transition, one of the staff members in Gloucester actually told me, if you do a physical transition, meaning surgeries and all that, you will not be able to get your degree from Morehouse. And I said, okay, that's fine. Because the reality was, I was never doing my transition for y'all. I was never doing it for Morehouse. I was doing it for myself. I was doing it for myself, and so I said, okay, that's fine. So I went ahead, I did the surgeries, I did the legal work and all that kind of stuff, and so because of the legal changes I went through, the medical changes I went through, as of 2018, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but there were actually women that attended Morehouse in the past during the 1930s. There were at least, I believe, 33 women that graduated from this school as Morehouse women. So it kind of bothers me when Morehouse says they're an all-male school, because really the history is not all-male. So as of 2018, I actually became the first full-time woman student on the record since the 1930s because of what I had went through. And so fast forward to 2019, you know, the gender policy came out, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. And about a month before it came out, the president called me into a private meeting to discuss with me what the policy included so that I would not be taken off guard. And so when we were in that meeting, one of the very first things he explained to me, he said, you know, you are our first transsexual female on the campus to do a full transition while being here. You're the first in the school's history to do that. So this is very new for us. So I said, okay. And so he explained the policy to me. And then a month later, it came out in April of 2019. And when the policy came out, the news reporters had heard that there was a woman in the house, and they wanted to find out who it was. And so I started getting phone calls from CNN, the New York Times, and different ones. And you know, the sad thing is, that was the very first time in my time of being at Morehouse that I felt like somebody knew who I was, that I felt like somebody actually cared about who I was. It was the very first time I felt seen. Because what some of you take for granted is that when you walk around this campus, you have so much representation. You can go into the halls of Gloucester and see posters on the walls saying, "We are Morehouse," and they're all men. Or you can go and look around campus and see the large banners. You can go around campus and see the large banners that say, men of Morehouse are well-dressed, men of Morehouse are well-spoken. So for so long I wondered, well, how am I supposed to dress? How am I supposed to speak? Where is my representation? What are my 5 wells? Are they different? Are they the same? And so it was the very first time in my time here, when those news reporters were calling, that I actually felt like somebody saw me and cared about who I was. And so I want to go ahead and, sorry, I got caught up just for a second. Excuse me for one moment. Yeah, but it always, you know, after the news reports came out, you know, I started thinking to myself, how is it that a school that is so big on racial justice, a school that is so big on social justice, had done so little to include and respect me as a Black transsexual woman? How is that we have one of the greatest civil rights leaders of all time to graduate from this school, and yet another person who is Black, just because I happen to be transsexual, doesn't get treated with half the respect? And so it always blew my mind. So I want to go ahead and put up the next slide. And I just want to make this quick announcement for some of you. You are not, because I know we have some racial justice people in the room, you are not pro-Black if you are anti-LGBTQ. And I just want to go ahead and make you all upset, some of you all upset. And I'm going to say it again, for the ones in the room who have hardened hearts. You are not pro-Black if you are anti-LGBTQ. And here's why. Because Black LGBTQ people have always been a part of Black history, and we always will be. the black race in America would not be where we are today if it was not for black LGBTQ folk, hence the theme of this Crown Forum, Bayard Rustin. Now I'm gonna go ahead and make the second announcement, and that is you are not pro-LGBTQ if you are anti-trans. Because some people in the LGBTQ community wanna say, well, we're progressive, we're inclusive. No, you're not. Because sometimes you can still be transphobic even if you're in the rainbow community. So I just wanna make that announcement for some of you. But what is my real point? My real point is that LGBTQ folk have always been a part of the history of Morehouse. And we always will be. So really what we need is for the Morehouse community to embrace us, because fighting us is not going to work. It never has. But I want to go ahead and start closing out and explain the real reason why I'm telling my story today. The first reason can be summed up in a quote by Audre Lorde, who said, if I did not define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And one of the greatest battles for trans people is the battle for self-definition. Somebody is always telling us, you're not real, you're not this, you're not that. Well, that's why it's so important for people like myself and other trans people to control our narratives instead of letting you control it, because it gives us a chance to define ourselves on our terms. So that's the first reason why I'm telling my story, because I want to define myself. I want to speak for myself. The second reason can be summed up in the last scripture. I know y'all think we're in church by this point. The last scripture. And it says, it's Revelation 12:11, and it says, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Now, I'm going to unchurch that for a second. I'm going to say I'm going to give you the remix. To me, what that means is we overcome through sacrifice and we overcome through storytelling. And so that's the other reason why I'm telling my story today, is because if it was not for the sacrifices and literal bloodshed of certain trans and LGBT folk, we wouldn't be where we are today. If it wasn't for black trans women like Marsha P. Johnson, who stood on the front lines fighting for the rainbow community, a lot of us would not be where we are today in this room. And she literally lost her life, and her murder was never solved. And so if it literally was not for the bloodshed that we have seen, the sacrifices that we have seen, we wouldn't be here. The second thing is that we overcome through storytelling, which is why I'm up here. A lot of the times when we tell our stories, it gives people a chance to see themselves in us. And so when you tell your story, somebody else is able to see themselves in you, and then they tell their story. In oral tradition, storytelling is a very deep black tradition, and it's one that we must continue if we want to continue overcoming. So I want to close out with this. One of the most important parts of my journey has been the healing process. And so I want to go ahead and put up the last slide that I have while I'm talking about this. But one of the most important things has been the healing process. And, you know, I think for a lot of us, especially in the black community, we like to skip over healing. So many of us have trauma for different reasons. You know, maybe you were left by your parents, maybe you were molested. Any number of things may have happened. And so many of us have trauma that we still have not been able to overcome. And so I think it's very important for us to realize the importance of taking our inner healing very seriously. Because for me, going through my transition caused a lot of trauma. I lost a lot of family members, a lot of friends. I went through a lot of rejection, especially in the early days. I would walk through this campus and hear a lot of you talking and saying different things. And so that created so much trauma for me. And so I had to really step back and say, okay, Nikita, it's great for you to want to do all these things and be a voice and all that, but have you actually taken time to heal? Because we can't skip over that healing process. And one of the things that I have found to be true is that sometimes we want to always have arrived at something and we don't enjoy the process. And what we don't realize about inner healing is that it's not about the arrival, because the process of healing is just as valid as being healed, because the process is actually what makes you whole. It's what makes you a person. And there's so many people in this room right now who are broken, and you come to school every day and put on a facade as if nobody sees you, as if nobody really knows what's going on with you. And on the inside, your life is falling apart because you haven't walked through that healing process. So I want to encourage each of you, even if you're not LGBTQ, to take your healing process seriously so that you can become a whole person who doesn't damage somebody else. And so one of the things that I did as a part of my healing process is research different trans groups across the world. And what I found was that many of them were seen as supernatural, divine beings. And so one example is the Bardash within Native American cultures. They are a group of people along the trans spectrum, and they are seen as supernatural beings. Oftentimes within their religious ceremonies in Native American cultures, the Bardash will hold special roles. They're seen as having the power of fertility and prosperity. They're also seen as having the power of dreams and visions. And so when I looked at my life and I realized that my culture, my society always tells me, you're not real, you're not attractive, you're not desirable, you're not deserving of love. And then I look over here at these other trans cultures, and some of them are operating as types of demigods, and I'm like, what's wrong with me? That I'm feeling this way about myself when really I'm supernatural. And so I just want to speak to all the LGBTQ folk in the room, all the trans people in the room, and I want to end with this. I want to tell you that you are divine, supernatural beings, and you have ethereal power. And so I want to encourage you to stand in your power and tell your story. Thank you.
On behalf of Morehouse Adoti, Nikita, we would like to thank you for coming out today and sharing your story with us. Can we give her one more round of applause for the strength that it took to share that story? Thank you so much. Once again, this Crown Forum was sponsored by Morehouse Adoti. Please take a moment and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Morehouse Adoti. We put on various events throughout the year for everyone. If you are LGBTQ, I do encourage you to definitely take part. At this point in time, can we all stand and sing the Morehouse hymn before we depart?